Hello and welcome to this new show that we are beginning here on this channel called Global Review, in which we would bring in the required academic rigor to analyze international affairs. We would be having focus on key publications, key resources that are coming in international affairs, and would also bring in many more issues and interviews, discussions that are required to understand how international polity is evolving. Let's have a look at the headlines of this week. Brazil's economy grew by 1% in 2017. Agriculture provides the traction. Al-Qaeda affiliate group kills 16 in Burkina Faso. United States ambassador to Mexico resigns. The crisis deepens. South Korea sends special envoy to North Korea in border talks with the United States. Italy emerges from the vote with rise of the right to occupy the government position soon. Taliban rejects Afghanistan government. Peace talks are in trouble. Let me introduce the guests today this evening with us. Professor Sriram Cholia, eminent commentator on international affairs. Professor Ruchita Berry, a key commentator on Africa and on strategic issues. But let's have a look at the across the globe section that we have. The story that we are picking up today is on Trump's new tariffs, which are going to be affecting the global trade. So friends, the new story that is unleashing the borders across the globe is emanating out of somebody who was preaching free trade all across. And the pretext is security. We are so glad that we have security experts and we have experts who are looking into international affairs all across. What has been done is in terms of imposing 25% tariff on steel and 10% tariff on aluminium. This is going to be a major issue in terms of how other countries are responding to the United States decision in terms of how they are going to move forward with new protection regime. Something that emanated out of G20 meeting last year and now is a practical reality. The task force that was set up by United States to make a recommendation which only recommended 24.5% expansion in the tariff regime for steel and 7.1% for aluminium. The president has given it to 25% and 10%. And this is now going to be addressed by the neighbors. The commentaries are all pouring from all across the world. China has some reaction, but more is coming from United States' own neighbor. We would discuss this with Professor Sriram Cholia. How do we look at this scenario? What are the options that other countries would have? But first, the sharp question, what exactly has happened?
Sachinji, the average American tariffs are around 2 to 2.5%. So, tariff of 25 on steel and 10 on aluminium is exorbitant, given that the United States is a developed country and cannot maintain such high tariffs across any sector. So, it's actually a tragedy in one sense, because it's not going to benefit American consumers or even American steel and aluminium based production companies that depend on imports of these products. And according to one analysis, there are nearly 3 million American workers dependent on steel and aluminium consuming sector alone. And
That's
so
right.
I think they are going to be badly hit. What Trump is saying is that, I'm saving jobs and I'm protecting steel workers who are producing it. But frankly, the steel producers and aluminum producers are estimated to be only 140,000 people. And there is a union, United Steelworkers Union, that's pushing for this, and which is the voting base for Trump in certain states like Pennsylvania, Iowa, Ohio. But overall, if you see, there are many losers within the United States, not to mention across the world.
Yeah.
Big countries, developing countries like Brazil are affected, so is Mexico. Quite a few from
that
Asia.
largely, Sriram, is the target group, and that's where President Trump is trying to derive some advantage. But the pretext that has come up is in terms of security. And that brings us to you, Ruchita. The idea that within WTO, it would be justified under Article 21, which gives you leeway in terms of imposing duties if you are really concerned about certain imports, which may have imperatives for your security. How do you look at it? Do you see United States security in danger with the import of steel and aluminium? And what lessons you see other countries would be deriving out of this?
Yeah, this is the first time that we've heard of a US administration using the security clause for imposing heavier tariff. And there have been reports which are coming in which say that earlier either the Republican or Democratic governments have not tried to do so because it will not only damage the economies of the other countries, but also the US economy itself, you know. And when you talk of security, I think security today is taken in a larger term. Yeah. Here we are looking at not just the traditional security which protects the state, but also the economic security and other security issues. So, so I think the worst losers of this step by President Trump is going to be the construction sector and the building sector within US, because they use
exactly. So we come back to the domestic imperatives that Sriram was really talking about.
Yeah, and President Trump says, you know, that trade wars are good. I'm not really sure whether they are good.
They're good and they're winnable, and America is going to win big. But I think it's a very naive approach, because George W. Bush had also imposed 30% tariffs on steel in 2002, 2003, and he had to withdraw them because of the retaliation and because it was found to be illegal under WTO rules. So
but
now,
Sriram, how you look at imperatives for other countries? Like today, we heard how the share prices are already tumbling. What happened in Japan yesterday?
South Korea.
Happened? What today's newspapers are reporting about Indian shares, particularly of Tata and other relevant companies in this sector. How you look at the larger scenario and the larger implication for other fellow developing countries?
Sachinji, trade wars are bad and they are unwinnable, and there are losers on all sides. So Trump, I think, because he has always had this fetish for deficits, and he believes that deficits are bad. He thinks that deficits lead to loss of billions of dollars and loss of jobs for Americans. I think it's a very, what we call a neo-mercantilist kind of approach to trade, which is not based in reality and in contemporary reality of globalization. But that's the whole politics of it, right? Because Trump believes he wants to reverse globalization and he wants to adopt protective barriers, and he thinks that that's how he can avoid what he calls the carnage that's going on with American jobs being outsourced to other countries. So I think it's a misguided policy, but on the other hand, he does have significant political support in some segments of American society. And overseas, he will be looking at certain allies, and he wants to use discretionary power in this. Even though if you apply this tariff, it has to be across the board, he is trying to look at maybe he'll give a concession and do a trade-off with another country like, say, Canada on NAFTA, which is also being renegotiated. And then there's a talk that he will try and bring in the renewed TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, also into these kind of deals, because South Korea is affected, Japan is affected, China to some extent is affected. But it's a lot of scapegoating too, and is not good for international relations, because it will lead to greater tensions, because across the board, as you mentioned, many countries are saying we are going to hit back. The best reaction is from the Europeans. Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission head, was saying this is a stupid move. That's the language he has used, and unfortunately we have now also forced to be stupid and to retaliate on the US.
And this, Sriram, it would also be extremely important for us to realize that how the gravitas that is required in international deliberations, particularly with Article 21 of WTO, what is getting sidelined is this collective commitment for multilateralism.
That's right.
That is what is getting affected.
If global trade is set back as a result of this, and it also has ramifications for economic growth across the board. Many countries go into recession if their crucial export sectors are hit. So already Brazil has not been doing so well, and this might impact them, for example, very badly. So there is a kind of a lack of good global citizenship on the part of Trump that we cannot deny.
But the fact that right in the beginning, people talked about a transactional presidency, and now we are hearing that the emphasis is on exporting pharmaceutical products. The fact that President has also observed that Canada should treat US farmers better. So you are getting into a sort of transaction.
And see, the logic of reciprocity does apply in a general sense between two countries, but he is looking at reciprocity across sectors, which I think is very naive, because he has in fact passed a snide remark about India as well, saying that Prime Minister Modi has committed to reducing the import tariffs on Harley Davidson motorcycles from 75 to 50%. Says, but that's not doing us a favor. We want 0%.
Yeah.
Well, and then he says there are Indian companies that are exporting motorbikes and motorbike parts to the US, and we put 0% on them. Why are they putting 50% on Harley Davidson? But across the board, if you see, the trade deficit between India and United States is not so high. It's only about 20-25 billion. The overall volume is over 100.
What do you think, Ruchita, how this reciprocity dimension comes in?
I think one of the major worries, we talked about security. I think the major worry is that the other countries might start using the same clause. I'm not worried about the current, measure which Trump is taking. I'm not really sure whether that will really go through, whether it might just get watered down. But I think the kind of, example that is setting across board to across the globe, that other countries might start using the same clause, and that might really impact US even more. Think of the fact that if some country uses food supply as a threat to its national security, and it says that we are going to reduce food imports, and US is the biggest
that's interesting.
exporter.
We would stop for a break now, and after the break we would look into stories that are going beyond the headlines. Let's have a break. Welcome back. In this section, we would look into some stories which are out of the headlines. The section is called Beyond the Headlines. In this section, we are going to have a story on Asia-Africa Growth Corridor.
The idea of Asia-Africa Growth Corridor emerged in the joint declaration issued by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in November 2016. The AAGC will envisage people-centric sustainable growth strategy, details of which would be evolved through a process of detailed consultations across Asia and Africa, engaging various stakeholders. The AAGC will be raised on 4 pillars of development and cooperation projects: quality infrastructure and institutional connectivity, enhancing capacities and skills, and people-to-people partnership. The people-to-people partnership would be the unique feature of this initiative. The strengths of AAGC will be aligned with the development priorities of different countries and sub-regions of Africa, taking advantage of simultaneous homogeneity and heterogeneity among them. This would be undertaken to improve growth and interconnectedness between and within Asia and Africa for realizing a free and open Indo-Pacific region. The AAGC will give priority to development projects in health and pharmaceuticals, agriculture and agro-processing, disaster management, and skill enhancement. The connectivity aspects of the AAGC will be supplemented with quality infrastructure. The AAGC-led growth in Africa and Asia will be responsive to the collective commitment for the Sustainable Development Goals. The AAGC Vision Study will use geographical simulation model to bring out the economic gains for Africa through its integration with India, South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Oceania. The AAGC will contribute to develop institutional mechanisms and model for connecting business, people, and think tanks that represent and contribute to the integration efforts in Asia and Africa.
So, Asia-Africa Growth Corridor offers a number of opportunities for India and Japan to work together with fellow developing countries. We have Dr. Ruchita Berry here with us. She has immensely contributed in terms of enriching the concept and the framework. So, Professor Ruchita Berry, what do you see how the philosophy of Asia-Africa Growth Corridor is going to help the fellow developing countries in Asia and in Africa?
Well, I think the initiative of Asia-Africa Growth Corridor is really unique. It is an initiative which is launched by India in partnership with Japan, and the focus is to bring the two continents of Asia and Africa together by promoting free and open Indo-Pacific region and building infrastructure which is of quality and enhancing skills of the people. Now, this whole vision of Asia-Africa Growth Corridor was launched by Prime Minister Modi during the Africa Development Bank meeting which took place last year in May in Ahmedabad. He launched the vision document which was prepared in cooperation between RIS, area and IDE.
And how you think, Ruchita, it fits in the larger sort of roadmap that the two prime ministers came up with in terms of open Indo-Pacific, which we heard last week when the president of Vietnam was also there? Yeah,
I think, see, there are 2 or 3 philosophies which are merging in this. First is that of India, the current vision which is of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, which is Prime Minister Modi's mantra. He talks about inclusive growth, which is for everyone. So this is something which is echoed by the Japanese also. They also agree to this kind of philosophy. And similarly, within Africa, there is been a move towards more inclusive growth. The Africa Vision 2063 also talks about this. It talks about achieving inclusive growth, sustainable growth within Africa. So I think the important part about the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor is that it believes in the philosophy of consultative process, which is something which has been the trademark of India's Africa policy.
This is extremely important, Professor Cholia, how you look at this consultative mechanism, bringing in all fellow countries together. What are the strategic imperatives of this? And as Ruchita very rightly mentioned, has huge economic opportunities. How you look at this?
Yeah, consultation is of course India's way, and it distinguishes us from our other neighbor, which has been building a giant transcontinental connectivity project called One Belt One Road, which many of us believe has been a form of creditor imperialism, which involves debt and enforced debt and debt traps, and also foisting upon weak nations all kinds of infrastructure projects that can become white elephants later. So I think we have done the right thing, which is to do a bottom-up approach as opposed to a top-down one that Chinese have done. And I think this is very important for India to make a mark in connectivity diplomacy, because for all the flaws, that what the Chinese have proven is, it is only through connectivity that you become a great power. Especially in the developing world. So I think that we need to move in that direction, but of course with our own philosophy, as Ruchita was mentioning, and it will also help us leverage some new linkages. For example, Southeast Asia, which is ASEAN, which is our immediate neighbor, is being connected through new shipping route once the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor comes along with the east coast of Africa. So that covers the full gamut of the Indian Ocean, the Eastern Indian Ocean, the Central Indian Ocean, the Western Indian Ocean, and that is the great maritime domain.
And then you go to Pacific, so you bring in Pacific.
Western Pacific will also come into some extent if we have the Pacific island nations involved, with whom we are doing a lot of diplomacy. So if we can cover these grounds, I think strategically also for India, politically, to have Japan on board and possibly the Australians. I mean, they are saying that we want to join hands with Japan and India in part of this.
But tell me something, how you look at the possibility of several such initiatives coexisting, because the preliminary estimates show us that there is $1.3 trillion deficit in global infrastructure requirement.
And Africa
when we talk about sustainable development goals, countries after countries, all estimations are showing that we require huge resources. So there is no question of exclusivity, right?
Yeah, it cannot be an either or.
Exactly.
It's like nobody can.
So there is no question of competition. It is supplementing efforts with our own approaches.
Yeah, and I think it gives more choice to the recipient countries. They should not be in a situation where they are completely dependent on one belt, one road. I mean, there should be other options. It gives them autonomy and protects their sovereignty. Why not have AAGC to enhance their choices and freedom of action?
Just a quick comment from you in terms of how the scenario looks to you.
I think, see, one basic issue that you should remember is that the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor talks about partnership. There is no donor-recipient here, you know, the relationship is that of partnership. So it's an equal, we are talking at equal footing with various countries, whether they are in Asia or in Africa. And I think it is an alternative. I also agree that this is not a rivalry that we are talking of between, say, Chinese model and the Indo-Japanese or Indo-Japanese, Australian, whatever, you know, whoever joins in. So it is an alternative model of connectivity, as you rightly said, connectivity is the future, you know.
Exactly. I just want to add that, you know, the model can be called North, South, South. Because Japan is there, possibly Australia. We are also looking whether the United States can contribute to make it a larger pool of resources for transportation infrastructure. North, South, South, I think, is the way to go forward.
That's right. Now, I think let us move to our next section, Book of the Week. In this section, we would pick up one book or a resource material that we see as important that has come on the shelves, and today we have thought of picking up the report on Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. Ruchita, you have contributed to this publication. What do you think is the central message that we are getting out of this?
The central message is that connectivity is important. But along with connectivity, it's the people, the connectivity of the people, which is equally important, and that it should be transparent. The connectivity should be transparent, and the growth which develops should be sustainable and inclusive. I think this is the message which the entire vision document tries to project. And the vision documents talks about 4 pillars of Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. First is development cooperation, second is infrastructure and institutions, third is
the development cooperation itself and the people-to-people contact.
That's right. You know. That's right. So these
are extremely important pillars. Shriram, how you look at it?
I think, you know, vision document is very central, because people often say from outside in the international community that India talks big but doesn't really have a doctrine to guide what it is doing in the international sphere. And they say it's like a mumbo jumbo of different projects here and there, and you have written your own last book was about our development cooperation, but it seems like there's no coherent philosophy guiding. But I think the vision document lays it out clearly. So anybody in the world, if they want to see what is India's ambition, what is India's, you know, contribution to global public goods and to net prosperity and net security of the world, this is one of the best you know, vision documents and books that can be read by the public.
And then how you look at the key message, as Ruchita said, is about connectivity, but connectivity and people-to-people contact, how you see the 2 points getting linked in this document.
Yes, Sachinji, you know, the former Prime Minister of Tanzania, Jakaya Kikwete, once said, show me all the hospitals in my country, they are built by the Chinese, show me the nurses and the doctors in it, they are all trained and done by the Indians. This is our strength, human capacity building. I think that's what we're doing. We should always bank on our mojos, and that is how India's influence can spread in the world.
Excellent, very impressive. Thanks Ruchita, and thanks Shriram for being with us. We come to close of this show. Please do write us back your opinions, your ideas in terms of how you would like this show to move on. Thanks once again. Have a good evening, and we look forward coming back to you next week. Thank you.